Welcome to yet another episode of VOCARE. VOCARE is a program about priesthood and the amazing life of a priest. Today we are at St. Albans Catholic Church in Cardiff, in United Kingdom. We are going to meet the parish priest, Father Philip Scanlan, who is a Rosmanian priest. Let's go and find out more about his vocation and his priestly life. Welcome, Father Philip Scanlan. How long have you been a priest, Father?
49 years.
Wow. Can you share us about your childhood faith, the faith formation, initial phases? How did you grow up in Catholic faith?
Yes, well, I was born not in this parish, but the next door parish, St. Peter's. And the norm was that we were brought up as Catholics. We went to Mass on Sunday. My mother wasn't a Catholic at that time. My father was, and I had two brothers, and it was the norm. Sunday we went to Mass. Gradually we got involved in things like sacramental preparation, because I was born just before the war. Second World War,
right?
Which meant that moving around, going places was very difficult.
Yeah.
And so I never went to a Catholic school. But we were able to be trained and formed and prepared for First Communion, kind of confession, and later on for confirmation. But it was part of the way a Catholic life was lived. It was not, there wasn't much else because, again, there was the danger of the war. We didn't go out very much, hardly at all, in fact. So the first years, even the first 10 years of life, there wasn't much going out apart from Sunday Mass and very special occasions. But up until then, the Catholic life and faith, especially Mass, had been part of life.
Good, yeah. How did you first realize that God is calling you for this special mission?
Well, as I say, when I left school, I decided I wanted to be an architect. And I went to an architect's office, where I was able to do some private study to prepare for that on my own. And I was there for 1 year. And I found that it was a very difficult way of doing things. And luckily in Cardiff, in those years, we had a school of architecture, the Welsh School of Architecture in Cardiff. So eventually I decided with my parents that it would be better if I went there full-time as a student. So I left my little way of doing things and went full-time to the School of Architecture. At the end of the first year, and this is where divine providence comes into the story.
Yes.
At the end of the first year, it was part of the course that you had to, in the summer holidays, you had to go somewhere of architectural interest.
Right.
And you had to prepare a set of drawings with details and measurements. So I went with two other students who I knew very well. We went to Bath, to a place called Prior Park, which is now a Catholic school. And we were going to measure up the the bridge in the grounds that was part of the job. So anyway, we did that and then came back. At the end of the holidays of that year, because I was living in St. Peter's Parish, where I was born, there was a group from that parish going to Rome. And because the parish priest at the time knew I was studying architecture, he more or less said, "Oh, you should go to Rome to see all those buildings, churches, every 5 yards as a church. You must go to Rome." So I went to Rome. As part of the visit to Rome, we had an audience with the Pope, Pope Pius XII.
Oh, okay, yeah.
At Castel Gandolfo, which is outside of Rome. And that was a very impressive occasion, no doubt. That was that. When I came back and went back to the second year in the School of Architecture, I went into Smith's bookshop one day where there was a book sale on. And the book sale was in one particular part of the shop. And the book on the top of the pile for sale was a book about the life of Pope Pius XII, which I bought for 1 6 in those days.
Yes.
And that book really set a way of looking at not just the life of the man, Pius XII, but of things of spirituality, a deeper awareness of the life of the church. And I realized then that I could well be doing a bit more, like, for instance, going to Rosary and Sermon of Benediction on a Sunday evening. So gradually it was filling out and deepening. And then into the third year now at the School of Architecture, I was in touch with the priests of the order here at the time, now I remember, one of whom I had met while I was in Rome, Father John Moss. And he said, "Oh, you must come and see us sometime." And the house I went to was in Sussex, Wadhurst. And that, in fact, was the novitiate house for that religious order in this country. So I went there just for a couple of days. And of course, the way of life, everything geared to routine, to prayer, manual labor, more prayer, community. And that made a big impression. So I came back, carried on. And then towards the end of that third year, this idea that possibly, just possibly, that could be something for me. So I went down there again. And I didn't make a decision then. But towards the end of that summer, I half decided that this was something I must try. And to do that, I left the School of Architecture, intending to go to the novitiate house at Wadhurst. But my father got ill, and I decided not to do that. But by now, I had, what we say, burnt my boats in the School of Architecture. Couldn't really go back again. So I got a job in the architect's office in Cardiff that looked after all the hospitals. Very interesting. And I was there for a year until The following January, in St. Peter's Church, on a Sunday evening after benediction, I was just going to stand up to go, and one of our Rosminian priests was in the pew in front of me. As I stood up, he turned round and said, "Are you the young man who's just come back from Wadhurst, the novitiate house?" And without thinking, I said, "No, I haven't gone yet." He said, "Come and have a cup of tea." Priests always offer a cup of tea. Come and have a cup of tea. And of course, everything then came flooding back. The experience, the memories, the questions, should I not? And then, I suppose the most important question, the challenge really, I had a chance to go last September, but I didn't. I changed my mind. Now it looks as if God is asking me again. Will there be a third time? Maybe not. So I now have to make up my mind. Is this a sign that he really did call at the first time and wasn't prepared to put up with no? So, to cut a long story short, at the end of that year, 1 year in the architect's office, I left and went to Wadhurst, entered the novitiate.
Wow.
Entered the order, and here I am.
Great. It's quite wonderful to hear how God has set track for you.
Yes.
And the best part is you didn't pose any resistance to it. You just allowed the Holy Spirit to work in you and just surrendered yourself. And it ended up this beautiful vocation. Yeah. Great. Can you remember the day of ordination, and then what were the emotions were going through in your mind? Have you taken any firm decisions how to become a good priest for Christ?
Well, one thing to remember is that in our order, the Rosminian Order, the Institute of Charity, you don't join that order to be a priest.
Okay.
That will depend upon obedience.
Ah.
But, as it so happened at the end of my novitiate, 2 years of novitiate, the superiors decided that I should go to St. John's Seminary in Wonersh, which is right next to the Rosminian House of Studies. That's what it was there for. So that's what I did, of course, and I was there for 6 years. At the end of that 6 years, having been made ordained deacon, and then there was the ordination, which took place in that house, not in Cardiff, in that house, together with one of our other students who died only last year. But the ordination took place there. My parents and my brother came, and nieces, and other relatives and other people I knew came. And of course it was a tremendous celebration and relief in the sense that 6 years of study and back and forth to the seminary every day is wearing sometimes. But anyway, we got there. And the ideal of priesthood was part of the formation in the seminary, of course. But the reality of priestly ministry wasn't something I knew anything about, because in those days, priests were ordained and they had not been anywhere near a parish.
Oh, right, okay.
Nowadays, of course, they spend a lot of time from seminaries, living on parishes, being part of ministry, and developing their own ideas and standards of priestly ministry. It wasn't so in my day. So after ordination, the next thing was the superiors had to decide where I was going to go next. I was sent to the Rosminian School in Leicestershire, in Ratcliffe. I was there for 1 year. And then I was sent for 4 years to the prep school for Ratcliffe, which is just down the road in Leicester. But I say was there for 4 years. During that time, I did have opportunity to develop some aspects of priestly ministry in parishes, because their supplies and be in contact with the local community, the parish where we were, and so on. So little by little, I got to know a little bit, very little bit, about priestly ministry in parishes. And then after those 4 or 5 years, I was sent down here to Cardiff, to my home parish, St. Peter's, where I was for 3 years. And that, of course, was a great boon, because I could come to be a priest in a parish that I knew very well, and I could discuss and share with people the Cardiff characteristics and the place and the people, what went on. Everyone knew what I was talking about, which was a great benefit and a boost. So that lasted for 3 years. Then I was sent here to this parish, St. Albans, as parish priest. I was here for 5 years. Then I was sent back to St. Peter's, parish priest, for 12 years. And then to Newport for 5 years. Then to Loughborough for 13 years. To Rugby for 1 year. And back to Cardiff for 4 years, where I am now. So the experience in each parish, of course, of priesthood and ministry is different. Every parish has its own character and personality.
As a priest with nearly half a century experience, how do you see the transformation of faith among the believers then and now?
Well, of course, the church, we have to exercise any ministry, evangelization, in a world that is largely hostile, or worse still, indifferent. And in that world, we have to find some ways of being able to communicate the essence of the church's mission, the essence of the gospel, the essence of God, which is not the same as you could do 50 years ago. Because 50 years ago, most people in this community here would be receptive, open to what you're telling them, and be involved and be part of a community life and commitment. That's not the same anymore. I'm not saying it's gone completely, but it is much less and different from what it was 50 years ago. The difficulties we now have is to find ways of responding to that same basic need in a totally different situation.
How receptive are the current churchgoers to the words of a priest?
Well, I think many people, even if they're regular churchgoers, will have been affected in a way by the things in the media, by things what they hear about, the things they read about, things on television, all the other communication media, which almost habitually now put across a message that is contrary to the message we're trying to put across. In many people's minds, therefore, there are doubts, different attitudes from 50 years ago, definitely. And if that continues, the problem it creates will get bigger and bigger as time goes by.
Right. Because of this resistance from the believer's side, you must have faced several challenges in your priesthood. Are there any specific events that comes up in your mind? And if you can share that, and also to share us the experience, how did you overcome those challenges when relying in Christ?
Well, yes, the one thing, of course, is I've already mentioned preparation for the sacraments, particularly adults for marriage, where you can have a personal relationship and you can, over a period of weeks and even months, go into some depth what their celebration is going to mean, what differences it make, where does it come from, the origins, the gospel, in other words. But that, of course, again raises the same question we've spoken of before, that it has to come back to that basic question: what is their opinion? What do they know about the man, Jesus of Nazareth? It's not just what the church teaches, because that comes from the man. We have to keep going back and back and back and back again and again and again, to start from the revelation of him as God made man, and his commission to the church to the end of time: go and teach all the nations. Tell them about me. Not just tell them about the Pope or about the sacraments. Tell them about me. And if that is not the basis of our evangelization, it will probably not get very far.
Right.
But in the world in which we live, the church in which we live, we should remember and have to remember that in spite of the obstacles I've mentioned and the indifference or the rejection or the hostility, there are a lot of wonderful things happening in the church now.
Yeah.
My big point of complaint: the media are not very interested in good things. The good news of Jesus Christ is not good news as far as the media is concerned. The opposite. They'll pay page after page after page. Bad news, bad news, bad news. We have good news. And we have to have the courage to keep on repeating. But I keep saying the same thing. It must come back to the man.
Yes.
Jesus of Nazareth.
Based on your experience, what would you say is the best way to share the love of Christ among the parishioners?
Well, it has to go back to what we know. In other words, it has to go back to the scriptures, to the Gospels. It is a use of media, the good media. For instance, I have used over the years many times, the Franco Zeffirelli Jesus of Nazareth, because the visual is something that a person will remember when they go home, rather than a wonderful sermon from whoever. So the use of the visual, which is why we put things up on the wall, they will remember them more likely by a visual image than just said. But the two can go together. But we're going back again, whether it's visual or audible, is just to say, well, what was it like on that day when that man from Nazareth went to the tomb of his friend and ordered him to come out alive, surrounded by people? What did they say? That's the reality. And sometimes, because we've heard the gospel accounts so often, the effectiveness is limited. But in some way or other, if we can challenge people, we've got a little course going in the parish to get behind the words of the Gospels. What does that mean? What was it like? What would you have said if you had been in the crowd that day and seen him cure that man who was blind from birth, what difference would it make? What difference did it make to the people who saw it on that day? That's the same one. It's him. So it's a way, but we have to keep going.
And just finally, can you give a tip to our young viewers how to listen when God calls you?
Well, they're not going to hear voices. They're not going to have visions. It'll very likely be through ordinary everyday events, meeting someone, reading something, seeing something, visiting a place, an experience of some kind. And when and if the idea in mind begins to develop, do not be afraid to ask advice. Discuss it with somebody who's already walked that road.
Thank you so much, Father, for your time. It was a wonderful session with you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming.
I'm Bishop David McGough, an auxiliary bishop here in this archdiocese. I'm just so delighted through yourselves, Christian faith will have a voice. And you're here today giving voice to that media. The greatest gift that any of us has is the gift of life itself. We struggle throughout our lives to live life to the full, and we sometimes mess it up, but that life is so precious. And it is God's gift to each one of us from the very first moment of conception to the last moment of our lives, to be cherished, to be loved, to be safeguarded. So God bless you all.
Shalom World, God's own channel.